Just before we get started today, a quick word from our sponsor, Upstart. Now, one thing is for certain, you are not the richest person in the world, unless you are. In that case, hello Bill, or hello Jeff, you guys seem to swap that title fairly regularly. Or maybe even hello Vlad. But, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Stay tuned for more on that. Upstart are a lender who look beyond your credit score and provide a great solution to paying off credit card debt or other high-interest loans with a smaller interest solution. So normally when you want a loan from a bank, they basically look at this magical number and decide whether they should give you some money. But Upstart, they don't just do that. They also look at your education and they look at your employment history because, as you can imagine, those are important factors as well. And I don't know about you, but having a bunch of smaller high-interest debts like credit cards, that's something that would stress me out. So you can consolidate that. So just go to upstart.com/brainfood. There you basically fill out a form. It takes about 5 minutes, and they're gonna let you know what the rate would be if you borrow some money from them. Then they approve you get the money the next day, and you pay off all of those high-interest loans and consolidate it at a better rate. 300,000 people have done this already. They're number one for this sort of business on Trustpilot. So get started today at upstart.com/brainfood. While the media reports when Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates flip-flop as to who is the richest person in the world, with Bernard Arnault and Warren Buffett nipping at their heels, as we previously noted in our video on the richest people in history, Bezos and Gates' combined wealth barely matches that of the known fortune of former Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi, who ruled over that oil-rich country for over 3 decades before being ousted and then killed in 2011. So how wealthy was Gaddafi? In the years since his death, so far nearly $200 billion have been found in secret accounts, real estate holdings, and other investments directly belonging to him. No matter whether he acquired it ethically or not, assets are assets, and Gaddafi had the most of any known person thus far this century by a huge margin. Another individual who has more or less ruled a petroleum-rich nation for about 2 decades now is likewise rumored to secretly have a net worth in excess of $200 billion. We're, of course, talking about Vladimir Putin. But is Putin actually the richest person in the world, or are these just rumors? To begin with, as you might imagine, being born in the Soviet Union in 1952, Putin didn't exactly start out life in the lap of luxury. In a bit of 1950s-era role reversal, his father was a cook and his mother was a factory worker. Putin himself would grow up and join the KGB in 1975, working a variety of positions with that institution over the years. While you might envision Hollywood spy-type scenarios were his daily life, in fact, according to journalist and biographer Mash Gerson, Putin and his colleagues were reduced mainly to collecting press clippings, thus contributing to the mountains of useless information produced by the KGB. The first rumor that Putin was using a government position to stash away quite a bit of money for his own personal gain came in the early 1990s, when he, in his then position as head of the Committee for External Relations at the mayor's office in St. Petersburg, allegedly helped broker a $93 million deal to acquire various food supplies for the city. In a nutshell, various companies were granted permits that would allow them to supply a huge amount of materials to foreign entities, and in exchange would be given an equivalent value back in foodstuffs to then be used within the famished city. The thing was, as far as anyone can tell, while the companies did send out the materials, no foodstuffs came back in return. The matter was ultimately investigated by one Marina Saleh at the behest of the city council, with Saleh in turn claiming that Putin's signature could be found on the documents of the deals. She states, "The raw materials were shipped abroad, but the food didn't materialize. There's 100% proof that in this Putin was to blame. As a result, in 1992, when there was no food at all, the city was left with nothing. The evidence I have is as solid as it gets. Putin, his committee, made bartering contracts to get food for the city. He issued licenses and commodities, wood, metal, cotton, heating oil, and oil, flew out of the country. That said, while she states Putin was to blame, and at least according to her she had definitive proof, she did not find any evidence that Putin had received anything in return for the apparently botched deals. As for Putin, he claims the companies that had been given the export permits in the deal were to blame for the foodstuffs not coming back as they were supposed to have, implying that Putin had no knowledge the deals wouldn't be completed as originally brokered when he issued the licenses. The city council would move forward with further investigation, but ultimately Mayor Anatoly Sobchak put a stop to it and the matter was dropped. While you'll read in many outlets reporting this story that Salye would die of so-called natural causes mere weeks after she made these accusations and the investigation was killed, in truth, she would go on to help found the Free Democratic Party of Russia and more or less continually rail against Putin to anyone in the media and the public who would listen, until eventually giving up in 2000 after the election and moving to the countryside. There she lived until her death at the age of 77 in 2012, though she did give a handful of interviews during that span, still unabashedly anti-Putin. As for Putin, from that 1992 political position, he worked his way up to becoming one of a trio of deputy prime ministers and was known to be Boris Yeltsin's preferred successor, despite before this being a relative unknown among the wider public. Ultimately, he did indeed become the president in 2000 after winning the majority vote. Once elected, Putin, like his predecessor, reported his finances and holdings publicly, including his salary and exact amounts in his many bank accounts. And he has continued to do this ever since. The result, over the years, while his salary has changed regularly from year to year, he has made approximately $100,000 to $190,000 annually in this span, for example, in 2018, reporting an income of $135,000. Today, between his wife's and his own accounts, the couple seem to have a little over $500,000 in cash in various bank accounts, though why he isn't investing this is rather curious given his apparent lack of other investments and almost complete lack of actually needing any cash for his day-to-day life, given the government foots the bill for most of everything. Of this, Putin states, "Honestly speaking, I don't even know what my salary is. They deliver it to me, I take it, put it in my bank account, and don't even count it." As for his other assets, he owns a studio-sized apartment in St. Petersburg, a slightly larger apartment in Moscow, owns a small garage, a couple of cars, a small plot of land outside of Moscow, and otherwise his various minor assets are of no great worth. Of course, over the years, people can't help but notice that Putin has a collection of watches he wears very publicly, whose purchase price combined is around his reported entire net worth, ringing in at about $400,000 to $700,000 if various reports are to be believed. For reference, the highest valued watch he has been spotted wearing costs around $140,000, a Patek Philippe perpetual calendar watch. On top of that, the clothing he can often be seen wearing is likewise extremely expensive, such as his $6,000 plus tailored suits from outlets like Vuitton and Brioni. Not just expensive suits. In one photo of him working out, Putin can be seen wearing sweatpants that cost over $1,400 a pair, apparently made from silk, cashmere, and the tears of impoverished children. He was also wearing a top that had a similar price tag. On top of that, among many other mansions, he is long rumored to own an estate known as Putins Palace near Prashkovika, widely reported to be worth about $1 billion by media outlets. However, this was actually sold in 2011 to one Alexander Ponomarenko, a former associate of Putin's, for somewhere around $350 million. Do note that the exact amount has not been publicly disclosed, but Ponomarenko has indicated it's in the ballpark of that widely reported figure. Ponomarenko purchased the estate from a group led by businessman Nikolai Shamalov. Ponomarenko claims he decided to buy the company behind the estate project and thus the mansion, as it was a steal of a deal owing to the project being stalled from lack of funds to complete the estate and the business group wanting to cut their losses on it rather than complete it. That said, Russian businessman Sergei Kolesnikov, who is exiled from Russia, claims the palace was built specifically for Putin's use. He claims Putin was able to afford its construction in part thanks to a gift given to him by the aforementioned Nikolai Shamalov in the form of 94% of the shares of a company called Lyris Holding. Among other personal knowledge of the development of the palace, Kolesnikov claims Shamalov himself told him this, and to quote him, "I have no reason not to believe him." However, no documents concerning any ownership connected to the project seem to indicate Putin or any other holdings of Putin's ever were directly involved with this estate. That said, some contract documents concerning its construction allegedly have the signature of one Vladimir Putin, one of Putin's inner circle of confidants. Of course, this still doesn't definitively indicate whether Putin actually owns the palace or even was behind its building at all. Simply, allegedly, someone he is close to was involved in some capacity, and later someone else he is close to bought it. A bit of a theme for many of these rumors. Putin himself denies he had anything to do with the palace being built. Nevertheless, Putin allegedly frequents the palace, and Federal Protective Service guards have been seen at the mansion, along with locals reportedly seeing Putin in the area regularly. Of course, among the extremely wealthy with such mansions, it's not uncommon at all to allow friends to guest in one's estates whenever they please, so Putin would not actually have to own the thing to stay there, nor would it be a big ask to do so. More or less par for the course among the exorbitantly wealthy. That said, on top of all this estate, Putin has been connected to causing to have had built or secretly owning several other mansions, yachts, planes, etc. Whether he actually owns any of these, or like Putin's palace, seemingly is just using them whenever he pleases, his flashing of extreme wealth in the case of his watches and other such items, along with an awful lot of not implausible allegations of widespread corruption within his government connected to him, has led to the belief that he has boatloads of money secretly stashed in accounts throughout the world. Others speculate Putin is simply using the government coffers to finance all of these extravagances. For many items, this would not actually be that uncommon for a major world leader, if a bit more excessive than most. For example, the replacement Air Force One planes the US president will soon have at his disposal have a budget of over $3 billion. The US president also gets a pretty posh mansion, that's the White House, and vacation spots to go to at their leisure, with the taxpayer footing the bill for quite a lot of these perks. But of course, the US government isn't funding $140,000 watches for the president, though bulletproof tailored suits occasionally worn by the president are presumably paid for by the US taxpayer. For more on this incredibly thin bulletproof fabric, go see our video, How Many Times Can You Shoot Through a Bulletproof Vest Before It Stops Working? To attempt to clarify these items, requests have been made to the Russian government asking if, for example, Putin's watches are actually his property, or they are the property of the state and he is just wearing them, but no answer to this question has been given that anyone could find. Whatever the case, yet others claim Putin is simply enriching many people around him, and then they are happy to provide Putin with anything and everything his judo master heart can desire. Yet others claim it is all three. Putin is enriching himself through shady means and using government funds and people he is helping make wealthy to get whatever he wants while he's in office. But the question of the hour is not whether Putin's net worth is more than he is letting on. That is very apparently true by his watch collection alone, whether he purchased them or whether they were gifted. The question of the hour is whether he is secretly the richest person in the world with a net worth in excess of $200 billion, as so many claim. So what does the man himself say about all of these rumors? I am the wealthiest man, not just in Europe, but in the whole world. So, case closed, right? He admitted it. Well, in truth, he wasn't finished talking. He goes on, I collect emotions. I am wealthy in that the people of Russia have twice entrusted me with the leadership of a great nation such as Russia. I believe that is my greatest wealth. Of course, whether he collects emotions or not doesn't inherently negate the first part of that statement, simply that he considers that a greater wealth than whatever he has possession-wise. Argue amongst yourselves whether this was Putin cleverly admitting to being the wealthiest person in the world while making it seem like he was saying he wasn't, and also simultaneously admitting he's a lizard person, given a hallmark of these creatures is apparently feeding on human emotions. For a more direct answer to the question about the rumors of his extreme wealth, he clarifies, it's just chit-chat, nonsense, nothing to discuss. They picked it out of their noses and smeared it on their pieces of paper. The Press and Information Office of the President of the Russian Federation also asserts of these rumors, this information has no substance. As you may know, the declarations of Mr. Putin's income and property are published annually. We recommend you to use only reliable sources henceforward and not to believe fake news in 2018. Naturally, nobody seems satisfied with these assertions given his apparent and frequent flashing of wealth far beyond what anyone with his salary should be able to afford. So what do others who might know a little more say? First, we have political analyst and noted critic of Putin, Stanislav Belkovsky, who claimed to the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in 2012 that Putin had a net worth of approximately $70 billion, though how he came up with this figure isn't exactly definitive nor inspiring confidence in his hard knowledge here. In his own words, the figure of $40 billion emerged in 2007. That figure could now have changed, I believe at the level of $60 to $70 billion. Maximum, we cannot know. I suspect there are some businesses I know nothing about. Mildly more concrete, at least in terms of giving something more specific, he also claims much of this wealth is because of Putin's alleged 4.5% stake in Gazprom, 37% stake in Surgutneftgaz, and allegedly 50% ownership of Gunvor. How he knows this, however, isn't fully clear. Belkovsky simply states he got this information through sources that he knows within the companies. It's also noted for a time that Gunvor was co-owned by a friend of Putin's, billionaire Gennady Timchenko. So what do these companies say? For whatever it's worth, Corporate Affairs Director of the Swiss-based Gunvor Group, Seth Thomas Pietrus, states President Putin has never had any interest in, investment in, or involvement with Gunvor Group, either directly or indirectly. Mr. Belkovsky's claims are based on absolutely nothing and are fundamentally ridiculous. And the US government, despite its statement, has never sanctioned Gunvor in any capacity, nor has it provided any evidence of its own. Moving on to Surgutneftgaz, they likewise deny Putin owns any shares. Gazprom, which is majority owned by the Russian government itself, with the rest of the stock being publicly traded, likewise shows no records of Putin owning any shares. Belkovsky counters these denials by the companies and lack of any record, stating that Putin has a rather elaborate network of offshore companies and funds that own the shares, which all ultimately mask that he himself actually owns, or at least controls them. Moving on to the CEO of Hermitage Capital Management, Bill Browder, he is the one that seems to have started the widespread rumor that Putin's personal wealth is in excess of $200 billion, stating before a Senate Judiciary Committee, "I believe he is worth $200 billion. The purpose of the Putin regime has been to commit terrible crimes in order to get that money. He keeps his money in the West, and all of his money in the West is potentially exposed to asset freezes and confiscation. Therefore, he has a significant and very personal interest in finding a way to get rid of the Magnitsky sanctions." On this latter note, one of Browder's former associates, Russian lawyer Sergei Magnitsky, was investigating corruption within the Russian government and allegedly found evidence of various Russian officials taking part in a near $250 million tax fraud scheme. Magnitsky himself was then arrested for allegedly being the mastermind behind the tax fraud and died while in jail before his trial. At the partial encouragement of Browder, the US then passed the Magnitsky Act in 2009. In an oversimplified nutshell, this allows the US government to sanction various individuals thought to be human rights offenders, ban them from entering the US, and more importantly, freeze their assets where the government is able to. The bill was essentially meant to allow the government to legally hold somewhat accountable those thought to have been involved in Magnitsky's death. As for hard data, however, Browder offers little. Next up, noted economist Anders Ausland, author of the book Russia's Crony Capitalism, The Path from Market Economy to Kleptocracy, states, "I would estimate that Putin is worth around $100 to $160 billion. We can see that Putin and his friends have taken $10 to $15 billion from Gazprom every year since 2004. That's just Gazprom. There are large numbers of transactions being made. What's much more difficult to see is where the money goes. It's typically Cyprus, Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, and Wilmington, Delaware." As to how he came up with these figures, he states, "My assessment is that since Putin's circle got its looting fully organized around 2006, they have extracted $15 to $25 billion a year, reaching a total of $195 to $325 billion, a large share of the Russian private offshore wealth. Presuming that half of this wealth belongs to Putin, his net worth would amount to around $100 to $160 billion. Naturally, Putin and his cronies cannot enjoy their wealth. It's all about power. If they are not the wealthiest, they fear they will lose power." Why he assumes Putin would get half of these alleged amounts instead of some other percentage is not fully clear. On that note, like so many before, nobody seems to be able to actually offer hard evidence that Putin has any money stashed away anywhere that's not publicly known about, which, when talking sums of allegedly $200 billion, is a pretty neat trick for someone who has been so highly scrutinized, including by the US Senate, who presumably, if they wanted, could just ask the CIA or other entities good at collecting such data to go and look into it. Given, instead, they are asking the likes of Browder, it has been presumed and widely claimed that the CIA and other such government entities have no definitive intelligence on this either. From this lack of a paper trail directly linking money or assets to Putin, yet his clearly lavish lifestyle indicating he does indeed have access to an awful lot of money, this has led many to conclude that Putin himself doesn't actually officially own most or all of the wealth attributed to him, but rather he is leveraging his position and connections to enrich those close to him who, in their gratitude, are then more than happy to provide Putin with any money or items he wants, from access to mansions to yachts to sweatpants that keep his judo ghiblis ultra comfortable when he's working out. As alleged evidence for this, we turn to the 11.5 million documents from the Panama Mossack Fonseca law firm that were made public in 2016, dealing in offshore holdings by over 200,000 entities. While Putin himself is not listed in any of them, the documents do reveal 3 close associates of Putin's among those who have offshore holdings partially managed by the law firm, with a combined amount of around $2 billion between the trio. Despite not owning these assets, there are many claims by various individuals that Putin uses some of these, like his personal bank account, most notably the holdings of a man claimed by many in the media as Putin's best friend, the famed Russian musician and conductor Sergei Roldygin. Not just a friend, Roldygin is also the godfather of one of Putin's children and was the man who introduced Putin to Putin's wife. As to where Roldygin supposedly got his extreme wealth beyond his noted music career, starting in the 1990s, Roldygin began investing in various oil and other business entities to great success. Beyond all of this, in 2019, Roldygin was also accused of being involved in a massive multi-billion-dollar money laundering scheme in conjunction with Sberbank CIB, which allegedly profited him greatly. That said, for those using these records as proof of Putin having money elsewhere via his associates, it should be again noted that these are the records of well over 200,000 entities throughout the world, and the vast majority who are using the firm are doing so completely legitimately, including actor Jackie Chan, who reportedly had 6 perfectly above-board offshore companies that the law firm helped manage various facets of. So that 3 of Putin's numerous friends who are exorbitantly wealthy should be included isn't necessarily proof of anything other than that they wanted to have some of their assets outside of Russia. Indeed, this is certainly not an uncommon thing in the country, as some formerly close to Putin who have had their assets stripped and forced to flee the country demonstrate, having some offshore holdings is probably a good security blanket just in case. On this note, political science professor and author of Putin's Kleptocracy, Karen Dawishaw, stated before her death from lung cancer in 2018, "Why is it that $150 billion left the country last year? Because they believed that their wealth can only be secured in the long term outside their own country." So coming back to the posed question of whether Putin is secretly the richest person in the world, whether these funds are being held for him or not, this is still not Putin's money. We're also going to guess that regardless of the amount of goodwill Putin has built up with these various businessmen and women, should he no longer be in power, they might quickly find themselves less than willing to support his lifestyle if that is what has been happening so far. And some speculate he might even find himself in a rather unsafe circumstance in that case. For example, one-time billionaire and the man formerly known as Putin's banker, but now exiled from Russia, Sergei Pugachev says, "Everything that belongs to the territory of the Russian Federation, Putin considers to be his. Everything. Gazprom, Rosneft, private companies. Any attempt to calculate it won't succeed. He's the richest person in the world until he leaves power." As for leaving power, he goes on that Putin chose not to leave office after his first term and beyond, not because of a desire for continued power, but rather because he feared for his own safety should he no longer be in that position. Even today, Pugachev claims, "I don't see any guarantees for him if he steps down." Putin doesn't see them either. This is why he finds it unlikely that Putin will ever willingly leave office. Though it should be noted that Putin himself has stated that he will not be running for president at the end of his current term in 2024. Also, for whatever it's worth, Pugachev, despite having billions stripped from himself by the Russian government, being currently in fear for his life and in exile, states, in his opinion, Putin himself is not evil, nor did Putin originally plan to set up a corrupt government when he took power, simply that he surrounded himself with like-minded people whom he didn't know very well and who had served with him in the KGB. They immediately began enriching themselves. Putin wanted to get rich too. He was a pragmatic person. We talked about this. He didn't want to leave office poor. As for the Russian government's position with regards to Pugachev, it is claimed that Pugachev defrauded the government of hundreds of millions of dollars, which is why the one-time bosom buddy of Putin originally had to go on the run. Pugachev counters, the state steals something, then has to defend its theft. In my case, the scale is huge, but in other respects, this is a normal contemporary business practice in Russia. This has all left the one-time billionaire with, by his own account, only about $70 million to his name, which he has kept in an offshore holding. Gotta be rough. In truth, the amount is unfortunate for him because Pugachev allegedly was offered a deal from a Russian official that if he paid $300 million to certain entities, his legal issues in Russia would be made to resolve themselves to his benefit and he could return to Russia. Further siding in the camp that Putin doesn't have hundreds of billions stashed away he officially owns, the aforementioned Karen Dawisha, who perhaps gives some of the best accounts and most concrete details of the alleged corruption within the Russian government in her Putin's Kleptocracy book, states that Putin's real wealth comes from his position. He takes what he wants. When you are the president of Russia, you don't need a written contract, you are the law. Again, backing up this position, financial investigator Elberg Files states, Putin controls wealth through proxies. He then makes up examples to illustrate. Sergei owes his fortune to Putin, so when Putin asks Sergei for a favor, the favor must be honored. A luxury cruise, use of a private Dakar, expensive consumer goods, etc. Ivan owns a shipping company and he owes his wealth to Putin, so when Putin requests a favor, Ivan, like Sergei, honors the request. So, is Putin the richest person in the world? Well, as Gaddafi demonstrated, it is possible to squirrel away $200 billion secretly, given the level of scrutiny thrown Putin's way by governments of the world looking into the matter, with nobody seemingly able to come up with any hard evidence. Most think this figure is grossly inflated, though it is generally accepted that he probably does have at least some significant amount stashed away somewhere. For most, however, the explanation for his rather luxurious lifestyle is most reasonably explained by the simple fact that he can pretty much have the Russian government foot the bill for anything he wants without much uproar or oversight. And it does seem like an awful lot of his compatriots have gotten exceedingly wealthy during his tenure, at least in part thanks to their connections with Putin and him leveraging his position to facilitate their enrichment. Thus, if that is what has happened, it's reasonable enough that many of those are happy to scratch his back whenever he feels the need for a new yacht or something like that, without Putin needing to have anything in his name to avoid the backlash that would result should he be discovered to have such. But as to answering the question of Putin's own wealth, as the consensus seems to be that most of his wealth is tied up in his position and associates rather than funds he directly has, it seems a bit of a stretch to call him the richest man in the world, though not a stretch at all if talking about all the money that he currently has influence over. His position as president of Russia alone would be enough for that. And as to the idea that he really does have $200 billion simply being held in other people's names as alluded to, we're guessing, even if many of these individuals are actually holding money for Putin, that should he step down from power and ask for that money to be given to him en masse, or even remain in power and ask for a combined sum of $200 billion, that shortly thereafter memorials and monuments would be being built for the former leader who sadly died in his sleep of natural causes. Thus, to sum up, while given his lifestyle and various possessions, Putin most definitely does have access to quite a lot of wealth between the Russian government and lots of friends in high and wealthy places. But when talking about his own assets, there simply isn't any real hard data to date backing up the claim that he is the wealthiest person in the world. And while not impossible, certainly, it would be quite the hat trick to squirrel away a couple of $100 billion without any of the world's governments being able to find hard evidence that he owns a dime of it. Of course, while some might argue access to vast sums should still count, access is not ownership, even if one can benefit from the money on some level. In the end, unless he really is one of the lizard people, he's probably not immortal, so at some point in the next few decades he will shuffle off this mortal coil, and perhaps then, like Gaddafi, more definitive data will be revealed. Or perhaps sooner, when he no longer has the protection of his position in 2024, as he is constitutionally unable to run for the presidency that year. Although, of course, he could always do as he did in 2008 and take a different position while remaining in power. Whatever the case, for now at least, while it is technically possible he does have $200 billion in secret, and even probable that he has drastically more than he's letting on publicly, which isn't difficult given his paltry public assets for a man in his position, given the current data at hand, the needle is seemingly tilted more towards Gates and Bezos being wealthier than Putin, at least in terms of money and assets that they officially own. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below and don't forget to subscribe. Also, please do check out our fantastic sponsor, Upstart, link below, or just visit upstart.com/brainfood. And thank you for watching.